Imagine a moment when you could have done something really well, but you chose not to. Not because you were lazy, not because you were afraid of failing, but because a part of you, deeper than reason, felt that if you actually shone in that moment, something would break. Maybe a relationship, maybe the familiar image people had assigned to you, maybe the quiet safety of not yet knowing how far you could actually go. You have sat in a meeting knowing the answer, but let someone else speak first. You have finished writing something that felt sharp and true, then deleted it before anyone had a chance to read it. You have been complimented, and instead of receiving it, you immediately deflated it. Oh, it really wasn't anything. You said that, and it became a habit. A habit you don't fully understand why you have. People usually call this humility, but you and I both know it isn't quite that. Because real humility doesn't hurt. This does. It feels like standing in front of a door you know leads somewhere you want to go, but your hand won't reach for the handle. The question isn't whether you have something to offer. The question is why a part of you doesn't want to have it. And the answer, by the time we reach the end of this video, won't be what you expect. There is an old paradox in psychology that Abraham Maslow pointed to when he studied people he called self-actualizing, those who were living most fully in alignment with their potential. What he found strange wasn't that they were more confident than most people. What was strange was that many of them had gone through a period in their lives when they deliberately made themselves smaller. Not because circumstances forced them to, but because they had learned that growing larger was dangerous. Dangerous in what sense? Not physically dangerous. Dangerous socially, emotionally. You grew up inside a system, whether family, school, peers, or culture, where excellence was sometimes not welcome, where the child who knew too much was considered difficult, where the person who performed better than the group was quietly isolated. And your brain, designed to learn from its environment, recorded that lesson deeply. Standing out is not safe. Marianne Williamson wrote something that many people quote, but few actually sit with long enough. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, but that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us most. But why would light be more frightening than darkness? This is what modern psychology calls the fear of success, and it is far more subtle than that simple phrase suggests. The fear of success isn't that you don't want a better life. It's that you're afraid that when you achieve it, you will become someone you no longer recognize. You will lose what psychology calls identity consistency, the internal coherence of who you believe yourself to be. Think about this for a moment. If your entire life you have defined yourself as someone ordinary, humble, someone who doesn't want to draw attention, then actually succeeding isn't just an external event. It is a threat to your identity itself. And the human brain, at a very primal level, treats the loss of identity as something close to psychological death. And so the larger question begins to surface. Is the you that you are protecting actually you? Or is it a version that others assembled for you? One you held on to so long that you mistook it for yourself. Now we go into the real mechanism. And this is where things start to become clearer, but also more uncomfortable. The first mechanism is what psychologists call self-handicapping, placing obstacles in your own path. This isn't laziness, though from the outside it looks that way. Self-handicapping is an extraordinarily intelligent protective strategy of the unconscious mind. Its logic works like this. If I don't try my hardest and I fail, I can still tell myself I didn't really try. But if I try my hardest and fail, then what failed was the real me. And that is unbearable. The problem is, the same logic applies when you succeed. If you try your hardest and succeed, you can no longer shrink back. You have nowhere left to hide. Success places you in a state of complete exposure. And for people who have learned that being fully seen is dangerous, that is more frightening than failure. The cost of mediocrity isn't failure. The cost is counterfeit peace. The second mechanism goes deeper, into what Carl Jung called the shadow. Not in the sense of darkness or evil, but in his framework. The shadow is all the parts of yourself you have learned not to acknowledge. And for many people, their real talent, their real strength, their real voice lives in the shadow. Not because it is bad, but because at some point in the past, someone who mattered to you responded to it negatively, and you learned to put it away. A 7-year-old child who sings loudly and is told, "Stop it. You're too loud," doesn't just stop singing. They learn that voice, that energy is unwelcome. And over years, they don't just stop singing loudly. They stop believing they have the right to take up space at all. Have you ever noticed yourself apologizing for things that don't require an apology? Have you ever felt guilty for being better at something than someone else? Have you ever wondered why you keep making yourself smaller every time you enter a room? Have you ever felt a quiet relief when a project failed, because at least now, no one would expect more from you? If any of those questions landed, you are not alone. The third mechanism is what researchers who study giftedness, especially those working with gifted children, call existential depression. People with deep thinking patterns and high sensitivity don't just feel joy more deeply. They feel the pain and injustice of the world more deeply too. And at some point, some of them arrive at an unconscious conclusion. The larger I grow, the more I see. And the more I see, the more I hurt. So perhaps it is better not to grow. This is where talent and fear become so tightly wound together that you can no longer separate them. It isn't that you don't want to be better. It's that you're afraid being better will demand a price you aren't sure you're willing to pay. And now we arrive at the real question. Who told you that was the real price? Or is it simply something you learned to believe from a world that never fully understood you? But analysis without direction is just pain with a more elegant name. So we move into the most important part. Not how to become more confident, because that phrase has been emptied of all meaning through overuse, but how to begin rebuilding your relationship with your own potential. The first principle is learning to distinguish between chosen smallness and fear-driven smallness. There are times when silence is wisdom. There are times when not competing is a way of conserving energy for something that matters more. That is a conscious choice, and it comes from strength. But if you are making yourself smaller because you are afraid people won't like you anymore, if you outgrow them, if you are downplaying your achievements so others don't feel inferior, if you are slowing down your thinking so you don't make anyone uncomfortable, that is not a choice. That is submission disguised as virtue. The question you need to ask yourself isn't, am I being too arrogant? But who am I shrinking for? And is that truly worth what I am sacrificing? The second principle is recognizing that living into your potential is not a selfish act. This is where many people get stuck. They were taught that putting yourself first is selfish. But there is an enormous difference between taking space from others and simply filling your own. A tree doesn't grow taller than the tree beside it to dominate it. It grows because that is its nature. And when it reaches its full height, it creates shade, fruit, and an entire ecosystem for everything around it. When you live most fully in alignment with your own gifts, you are not taking anything from anyone. You are adding something to the world that only you can bring. Let that sit with you for a moment. Then ask yourself, am I withholding something the world actually needs, simply because I am afraid of being seen? The third principle is understanding that identity is not fixed. One of the deepest reasons people fear growth is that growth means change, and change means no longer being yourself. But Erik Erikson, who spent his entire career studying how human identity develops, showed that identity is not a fixed point. It is a continuous process. The version of you from 10 years ago and the version of you today are already very different. And the world is still here. And you are still you. The larger version of you is not a stranger. It is you after you stop pretending. Many of you watching this are at a point in your life where the question, "Who am I really?" is becoming more urgent than ever before. If you want to keep having conversations like this one, leave a comment below and tell me which part of this video landed most deeply for you. And if you find this kind of analysis valuable, subscribing to the channel is the simplest way to make sure you don't miss what comes next. The fourth principle, and this is the most subtle one. Start with small moments, not grand transformations. The human brain doesn't change through dramatic declarations. It changes through the accumulation of small moments when you act differently from the old pattern. The first time you hold still instead of apologizing. The first time you share an idea without immediately diminishing it. The first time you finish something and allow it to exist exactly as it is, without editing it into invisibility. These moments feel small, but each one is a choice to trust yourself more than you trust the fear. And now, here is what I want to leave you with. Everything we've talked about today. All the mechanisms, the fears, the unconscious strategies, none of it is evidence that you are broken. It is evidence that you survived. That your brain did exactly what it was designed to do. Protect you in an environment where it learned that growing larger was dangerous. But here is the final paradox. The insight I want to end with. The real problem isn't that you don't want to be gifted. The real problem is that you have become more comfortable with being safe than with being real. And in a world that rewards conformity, refusing your own gifts doesn't feel like abandonment. It feels like survival. But survival and living are not the same thing. And perhaps, just perhaps, the most frightening thing isn't that you shine, and others can't bear it. The most frightening thing is that you shine, and you realize you always could have. That all those years of making yourself smaller were never required. That you were freer than you thought, all along.